Hey there folks, Wrel here. Today I'd like to ask how you feel the air game has changed since the update, as well as share my own observations post-patch. For those who don't know, there was a big patch recently which made a bunch of changes to the air game, mainly the air-to-air aspect of it. Some of those changes were small, while others completely reshaped how air combat is approached. I'll link the patch notes in the video description, and you'll likely see some more adjustments after this video is made, but we should go over the more significant adjustments that took place. Air-to-air missiles have been a long-standing complaint within the air community, both for new pilots and veterans alike, due to the massive, practically inescapable damage output against ESF. Since the patch, the role of these weapons has shifted toward hunting bigger game, with Galaxies and Liberators taking more damage and ESF taking less. Right now, the range is a bit too low on them to match the reward with the risk for fighting a Galaxy or fighting a Liberator, but having less of this weapon in the sky has made flying all around much more enjoyable. Coyotes are once again able to lock onto targets that have stealth equipped. That was the big change, but it really didn't matter unless you were running stealth in the first place. There was also a reload speed nerf, a small projectile acceleration buff, and a max speed nerf. There was a lot of concern about the weapons being too powerful, but that didn't really turn out to be the case because what you gain in damage, you lose in survivability due to not having afterburner fuel tanks. One of the things I would like to see happen to these are to give them a small arming time so that if you're flying past someone or you're barrel stuffing them, you can't just get free damage because you happen to be nearby. The composite armor defensive slot for Valkyries and ESF now mitigates damage taken from ESF noseguns. This change made it more valuable for players who like to duel, but this comes at cost as well, since you now show up on the radar of enemy ESF. And the reason you now show up on radar is because engagement radar has been built in by default. It no longer takes up a utility slot, it's just there, but only for ESF. This has hugely transformed how air combat takes place. So instead of flying around solo, more players are sticking together. Because when you know that you're going to show up on everyone's radar, it's dangerous to go alone. Likewise, target acquisition has gotten better. When you have an ally getting attacked, it's easy to see that and then fly over to help. And as a result, there have been some crazy air battles with a lot of players, and to me, it kind of felt how air-to-air combat should have been in the first place. The downside to this, or maybe the upside, is that stealth as a defensive slot has become much more useful. If you want to fly around undetected and take advantage of the same style of close-up rotary play that you may have engaged in before the patch, you need to run stealth, because it reduces the range at which engagement radar can detect you. It actually eliminates it altogether at max rank. Another benefit of the engagement radar change though has been that Galaxies and Liberators are now much easier to keep track of, and as a fighter that's meant to deal with air targets, that's a pretty big deal. It's also increased the risk of solo living, so that instead of having a Liberator just swinging one-shot kills around with nothing that you can really do about it, you're much more likely to get friends to show up at some point. Remember though that any of these vehicles can run stealth to negate engagement radar. A downside to the increased value on stealth and composite armor though is that fewer players are running nanite auto repair. This is mostly a quality of life issue to me. Unlike ground vehicles, air vehicles have a hard time repairing because they need to land. The act is dangerous alone, but being exposed to enemy aircraft who now show up on the radar for you is an even bigger drawback. This could be addressed in a handful of different ways. You could add a passive slot to the ESF that allows them to be repaired slowly over time while out of combat and piloted by an engineer. That'll discourage bail assaulting as well. You could add a benefit to a tech plant just to give baseline NAR to ESF, and if it then feels like nanite auto repair is being overshadowed by that tech plant benefit, you could always change NAR to something more combat oriented instead of quality of life oriented. Other changes that took place were that rotary noseguns all got buffs, but the main point was to bring them up to par with the Vortec rotary. They all feel pretty strong right now, and they complement stealth afterburner play as much as they did, maybe even more, than they did prior to the patch. The LOCUST noseguns all had their damage drop-off removed, which means that they do the same moderate amount of damage at any range. This has made them better at dealing with larger targets, since it's easier to land shots, but I've also seen plenty of pilots using the noseguns in normal play thanks to the versatility. Anti-infantry noseguns were adjusted, which included taking all of them off of the heavy machine gun resistance, which made Banshee and light PPA way too powerful against enemy vehicles. The Banshee could almost one-clip vanguards from behind. It was really silly, so that's been adjusted. They also received adjustments to their infantry killing potential as well. In general, the Banshee feels really good right now. Air Hammer feels a little bit more powerful than it should be, but only up close. And the light PPA is a little less powerful than it should be at range. Some really easy adjustments can be made to nudge these back into place, and hopefully you'll see that in the future. One thing I've noticed is that air-to-ground work is a lot more difficult now than it used to be. It could just be me, but I really doubt it, because the combination of engagement radar and just the fact that there are a lot of ESF in the air right now means that you're having to deal with more enemies in the sky, as well as people pulling more anti-air weapons on the ground. I've been using flares a lot more due to this, and the added benefit is that it also works against coyotes and striker rounds, but the downside to using air-to-ground setups has always been that you don't have an afterburner fuel tank in the secondary slot, and that makes it very difficult to escape ground units, and your nose gun isn't so great at dealing with ESF. Okay, that maybe hasn't always been the case, but it's pretty close. The best time to use air-to-ground ESF right now seems to be on defense, and while this has always been the case, trying to support an attack with air-to-ground has been much more difficult. That said, if this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, either because of the gameplay or because of the information on what's changed, feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel. Also, go ahead and let me know how you feel the air game has changed for you. As either a new pilot or a veteran, which changes do you like or dislike, and where would you like to see things go in the future? Thanks very much, folks. Wrel signing off.